Okay, so I've looked forward to doing this for a long time. And the first issue is, do you think anybody's going to care what we do? Is there going to be any impact of this video? And I think events have conspired in a way that's highly favorable to making this a very watchable video. I mean, the big event you would know of best is Amanda Gorman's poetry at the Biden inauguration. She's 22, so an example of a really mesmerizing speaker who's young, who has great potential, who's already done stuff, but where one of the exciting things is, imagining what else she will do, right? I mean, that's kind of the excitement that you can have with a young speaker. So you might wonder then, what could Amanda Gorman possibly have to do with Robert Heptinstall? Like, what do the two have to do with each other? So then you have to cast your mind back, get in a time machine, go back to January 1973, when I was in my first PGY 1 year, my first year of training in pathology at Johns Hopkins. I was taking my cytology rotation, and I was very keen on the Oberlin College winter term program that allowed undergraduate students at Oberlin to take the whole month of January off and to go visit alumni with interesting jobs. And so while Hopkins was training me, I was training these 5 Oberlin students. And the next thing is, you can say, well, what happened next? Well, the reason this continued, it obviously wouldn't have. Imagine if I had done that and my boss, Robert Heptinstall, had been really upset and said, listen, you should stick to your training, don't do all these extraneous things. What's wrong with you? Then the whole thing would have stopped. But he was fascinated. He said, no trainee has ever done anything remotely like this, and I think you should continue it. And so it basically has continued for the next 47, 48 years, right? And that's where you guys fit in. Why am I not creeped out and uncomfortable to be spending time with you and always looking at my watch, because such a waste of time to spend time with young people, got important people to see and places to go, and I don't have time for you. Why don't I feel like that? It's because he supported the idea of my having these very young students work with me throughout the period I was at Johns Hopkins, and then when I came here as chair, the practice continued. So so that's the connection. And you might say, well, that's all very good, but nothing practical will come of it. No, that's not true. Because now that Robert Heptinstall has died, we've got a meeting to prepare, like we're planning a Robert Heptinstall symposium. And that meeting should have a purpose and sort of characteristics, Is it going to be a big meeting with thousands of people? Is it going to be limited size? Is it all going to be old people? Are we going to try to find the oldest presenters we can find? Get a lot of 80 and 90-year-olds presenting so that, kind of people like him, and would that be good? Because he died at the age of 100, or do we have a different plan? So Robert Heptinstall hated large meetings. He felt they were just social events, a complete waste of time. And he encouraged me not to spend any of my time professionally planning meetings. Well, then you'd be aware I planned a lot of meetings, but the Banff transplant pathology meetings that I started in 1991, August 1991, the active sessions are generally less than 150 people. Like the total meeting may be greater in size, but each session, the organ specific sessions tend to be less than 150 people. Now, what's the magic of this 150? This is Dunbar's number of the number of empathetic friendships that your cerebral cortex is able to sort of maintain at one time. And it's a phenomenon in all primates. So like monkeys and other, various primates may have Dunbar's number of like 30 to 40. That's the social group size that they can really handle, and they end up caring about the other people. But human beings, it's 150. So it fits very well with Robert Heptinstall's idea of not liking really large meetings. And at really large meetings, then you're walking down the hall, you see somebody else that you recognize, and internally you're praying that they're not going to stop and talk to you because you actually don't have any interest in what's going on in their personal life. And you realize that if you get interested in their personal life, you have to kick out another one of your 150 people that you have these, empathetic friendships with, and it could just mess up everything, right? So whereas in a more intimate meeting with fewer people, you're really interested in talking to everybody, and you don't get that sort of overwhelmed feeling. The third part of this then is Robert Schreier, and he died in the last week. And the importance of his input is that the whole thing about what I could provide to young people requires resources. And Robert Schreier was the influence that gave us such very adequate funding in the beginning in 1997 when cyber nephrology began. He had a budget of approximately 400,000 US a year. So, I mean, a lot of resources. And the Banff classification, in the beginning, we didn't have a lot of funding from the outside. So a lot of the funding in the early years of the Banff classification came from the cyber nephrology funding. So Bob Schreier was very important in sort of making the argument that we should have that very adequate funding. And it meant then in 2007, when we lost our funding from the NKF, but the NKF said they wanted everything to continue, that I was able to fulfill the hopes and dreams of the young people joining us by giving them really interesting things to do. So now I want to kind of reflect on the experience that the two of you have had. Now, Korey and I go back, I think, to 2014. Is that?
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah. And so 2014 is when I got the idea that young people's creativity could fix the existing unfixable problems and a lot of the futuristic things that we talk about, particularly transhumanism, but also longevity. I was aware that Canada is unique and it doesn't have any longevity organization at all. And nobody seems interested in leading one and forming one. Every other sort of first world country has kind of a longevity organization and they cooperate internationally and so on. So both longevity and transhumanism were in a complete structural mess. And I thought that young people could fix that. Now, you may recall, Korey, in 2014, there was a medical student working with us, Anson Dong.
Yeah.
And Anson, I got very excited because he was willing to join David Pierce's Facebook group, the hedonistic imperative. And I thought that by joining that group, all the change I was looking for was going to sort of happen. But really, there was a lot of reasons that it didn't. It isn't, Anson's inaction or anything, but really the field wasn't ready. There would have been too much resistance. A lot of things hadn't happened yet. So I think really transhumanism wasn't fixable in 2014. I had the idea then, but you yourself were very, very inspiring in a number of different ways. You proved to be sort of a multifaceted person. One is when we had famous people to interview, we needed interviewers, people to talk with them who could keep the conversation going. And you were extremely good at that. And think of it, if it had to always be me, if these students just sitting there and I was the person always keeping, that would have been so boring, right? So you were really skilled at that. And the other thing is you had a lot of graphic arts interests and skills. And one day I announced that we needed to put together the graphics for the next Banff meeting, the 2017 Banff meeting. And you created just outstanding graphics. The problem was, it's a funny problem, but I think it was very wounding to you, that the meeting organizing company in Spain who was handling the meeting, they had a standard way of generating their website every time that they did the meeting with sort of boring, ordinary, white-based graphics, where your graphics were very colorful and so on.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, the problem from their point of view was your graphics were too good. And they were really upset that we found this highly superior artist to make a competing website when they had to go with their, so anyway, you created a lot of beautiful graphics for the 2017 meeting that were never used, but it was very much appreciated that you had done that. But politics sort of came in and shut you down, right? First, you got all this praise. Dr. Mengel and I told you how great the graphics were, and then you found that we weren't going to use them at all. But anyway,
it was unfortunate, yeah.
Yeah, but you're a resilient person, so you were able to withstand that. And then in 2018, I was doing this special article on the Banff classification of tissue engineering pathology, and I needed graphics. So I came into the lab and I said, well, can anybody do graphics? Yours was the only hand raised. Nobody else raised a hand. And so in the cover letter for that article, I clearly said that these pencil sketches are just the starting point, and I want the journal editor to get his professional graphics people to do the final art. But then they decided to fast track the article. They sort of forgot about that stuff I had written. And so we ended up using your pencil sketches as the final art.
Right.
Yeah. So now here's the surprise for you that I was promising. I am virtually certain that because so many things are sort of coming together in 2021, we're going to be able to get the journal to produce those, professional color art pieces that we were looking for back in 2018, February 2018. They will, as a favor to us, I think, be willing to do that now. And so we don't have to like redo the whole article. It won't be in the print version, but in the online version, you could have a version of the article with, professional art based on the really excellent pencil sketches you did. But
Wow.
yeah, so I'm pretty sure that can happen, will happen. So isn't that cool?
I mean, I'd be quite excited to see those. It's been a while since I've seen those sketches. So
Well, I still have what you did. They're just right here in a folder. So anyway, you can see the copies of them in the article in the journal. But yeah, so so now think about this from Taryn's point of view. The difference from Taryn's point of view is back in 2014, I was sort of directive. Like I told Anson Dong that, I hope that his joining David Pierce's Facebook group would mean that, we could stimulate all these needed changes in transhumanism. I think that's the wrong approach. It shouldn't be me telling somebody else to do this. It should come internally. It should be something that the student themselves wanted to do. So let's talk about Taryn's presence in the course last term. She was really a stealth student. Like I had no idea what she looked like. Why was that? Because she was using an AHS computer to take part in the course with no video. So there was never any image of her, just the name, So I had no idea, really. And I just put out the general wish that, somebody sometime would do this to take on, transhumanism and try to sort of modify the way it's presenting itself to the world in a way that young people would be pleased with and want to sort of join the effort, and even have an easy to understand definition, which really hadn't happened before. And so, yeah, basically, Taryn just sort of went with it. And the other side of it would be the top-down character, right? So Dr. Solez is in charge of the course, and you would think that the students would just do whatever Dr. Solez said, right? So that is not necessarily the case, because in Taryn's case, just think about the following scenario. So like she picks me as her mentor. She asks for my suggestions on her final paper and presentation, and she rejects them all. She doesn't do any of this stuff, but she like does everything better than all the other students. Everything about she had higher grades in the midterm and better presentation, better paper, better class participation. She far exceeded everybody else's performance. And what it meant was that her final presentation and paper is much more her own, creative work, rather than just taking ideas from all sorts of other people out there and sort of cutting and pasting and putting them together. Hers was very much her own creation. No one in the entire history of the course had ever done that. But I would point out, Korey, that a lot of things you've done, no one, like, so both of you are sort of unique. So no, I've been doing a lot of talking, and I was hoping that like now you would tell what this is like from your point of view, right? And do you believe? So do you think that this is a hoax, right? This idea of young people's creativity being something important as a force in the world, is it possible that that's a completely erroneous belief and that I'm just, deluded thinking that, but the thing that makes one think that that's maybe not the case is what happened at the Biden uh, inauguration, right? So anyway, I'd like to hear now from the two of you and what it's like to be the creative uh, young people as opposed to just being an old guy talking about it, and whether you believe in the force or whether you think it's tremendously overplayed. And yeah, so
Certainly. Yeah. Okay.
uh,
Well, hello, Taryn, by the way. Pleasure to
Hi.
meet you. Yeah.
Nice to meet you too.
I'm not too sure if you want to start or
You go right ahead. You came first.
sure. Okay. Okay.
many years first. Yeah.
Mhm.
Uh, well, I guess a recent incident, and it may seem minor in the grand scheme of things as we've been discussing, but I feel like I've been able to kind of lean into my youthful enthusiasm at work as of lately. And again, what I'm about to describe seems like a very minor point, but so Taryn, if you're not aware, I'm currently working as a clinical dietitian in Calgary. So I work at the Foothills Hospital, um, and I spend a lot of time on the bone marrow transplant unit. And with the bone marrow transplant unit, unfortunately, one of the very common side effects with the chemotherapy regimens that patients have is this altered taste perception as the chemotherapy takes hold. So one of there aren't a ton of really hard and fast remedies that we have for this right now. However, I noticed that a lot of patients who were coming up to my unit were receiving um, supplementation of zinc and as an outpatient. And anecdotally, there were a few patients that said like zinc was really helping them, and it was quite a profound thing for them. Unfortunately, this practice wasn't something that any of the physicians on my unit had taken stock of. And it was one of those things where I constantly brought it to the forefront during rounds and one-on-one discussions with the physicians. And I kept kind of getting it thrown back in my face. And the reasoning for it was, we had only really anecdotal evidence. In terms of clinical trials, there were only really 4 to speak of in the past, 8 years or so. And I just feel like as a whole, the senior physicians on the unit weren't ready to embrace trying out something. And they weren't ready to perhaps take on this quality improvement project that I became more and more passionate about on my unit because, after discussing with the pharmacist, after discussing with the rest of the medical team, zinc supplementation in terms of how it can negatively affect the treatment plan of the patients that I usually see. There wasn't a lot to say that it would be a extremely negative impact. And I guess the thing I was frustrated with for a while was if everyone agreed that there was no serious negative consequences of this, then why isn't it something that, we just try out in the inpatient setting? If we're already doing it in the outpatient, let's try and generate our own data. Let's not have this situation where people are telling me, oh, we don't have any data. Let's not try it. What if we were the ones who went ahead and generated our own data? So I became a little more emboldened by that. I started to speak with, really any physicians on the unit, not necessarily just the usual physicians who were stationed there. And slowly and slowly over time, I'm sure my insistent nagging and bringing it up at rounds started to maybe really plant the ideas with the rest of the medical team. Unfortunately, I had to be shifted to a different unit because we needed different hands at a different part of the hospital. Um, so I've not been working in bone marrow transplant, I mean, since the end of October. However, recently, at a meeting with my clinical manager in, just like last week, she did tell me that uh, one of the very exciting things that is taking hold on that unit is one of the physicians who used to be the most ardent um, pessimist, maybe, uh, to the idea of zinc supplementation, um, recently started prescribing it on his own accord. So it feels like a small victory to me. It feels like something that perhaps would not have come around without the tenacity of um, my wanting to just push this idea that no one else really had tried before. So, like I said, in the grand scheme of things, it seems very quite small, but um, it does seem like one of those instances that Dr. Solez kind of refers to sometimes where people perhaps are not thinking about these ideas, and it takes someone from really, the outside setting, someone new to come in and say, let's give these things a go. No one's tried them before. So mhm.
So when I won the mentoring award in 2016, I always felt that one of the reasons that I won it was that you and Rangelou were the people who were physically taking the documents to the office where we had to uh, submit things. And so I sort of felt there was a kind of personal diplomacy going on. Not only were you students working with me, but I had these 35 letters from people supporting the mentoring award, and the two of you were like going there to meet face to face with the people receiving the documents. Now we'll never know. Maybe that didn't have anything to do with it, but anyway, I like to think that it did. So
Hmm.
it's a similar sort of thing. So, Taryn, do you want to give kind of your side of the
Yeah.
story? What it's been like to be you?
It's been, yeah, it's been interesting for sure. I mean, it's just the beginning, right?
Right.
We're really just starting this discussion. I think to maybe touch on a few things that you had said, um, I think it's easy to want to be right and to think that you're right. Like the doctors in your example, like they're reading the literature, they think that this is, it's easy to take that status quo for granted. But I think you're right, when you have new perspectives come in and when you're actually curious enough and open-minded enough to take those seriously, I think that's where real innovation can come from. It doesn't happen by just repeating the same thing 10 times over and getting the same result, which is important in its own right. Like we, need that kind of support too. But I think, young people who have an outside perspective for whatever reason, are able to kind of come in to whatever field and just look at the problem so much differently. Like they have their own wealth of knowledge that they bring, and we're looking at the same problem, the same way with the same 10 eyes. And, it doesn't really lead to any new ideas sometimes. That's not to say, like, I think my personal philosophy is that you should always be willing to be wrong. And I think embracing that and, seeing what the young people have to say, even if it's crazy, even a crazy idea can have merit. If we think about the different, like all these revolutionary ideas, they seem crazy at the beginning. They seem impossible, the folks that are telling you that zinc won't matter, like it takes somebody to ask, well, why couldn't it, right? Why couldn't it? Why couldn't we try that? Why don't we do this? I think, yeah, in my like personal experiences, yeah, I don't know how much you have heard about me either, but
I've actually heard nothing. I'm very
oh,
quite intrigued.
oh, okay. So my background, so I graduated last year with an undergrad in biology, but my minor was in women and gender studies.
Mm.
And so I've always had this, I'm a science nerd, like through and through, I love science. I really think that it's an exciting project and it's what I hope to do with my life. But at the same time, I have this desire to make it mean something, for it to matter, to make sure that it actually is doing what it needs to do for the people it's trying to do it for. If we're just pursuing science for the sake of it, or just to make, a bunch more papers that say the same thing, I don't, what good is that? That's not very exciting. That's not pushing the envelope. Um, yeah, so for me, like having my ideas, like having Dr. Solez think that my ideas are good and have them be taken seriously is so exciting, because the things that I've maybe said, like if I'm in a giant lecture hall and I have one of those like what if questions and I put up my hand and there's no time to discuss it, or it doesn't matter or whatever, right? But to have my ideas be taken seriously, it's really exciting to actually think about the potential and to think about what, like it becomes like a feedback loop of like, wait, somebody believes in me. I'm going to invest in that and see what more can come of it,
Mm.
Like I think it's easy, especially like just starting out in academia or really any field, right? It's really easy to feel like you're insignificant and that, you have one job to play. It is just the job that you signed up for, line by line, this is your description. And for people to allow you to go beyond that and to believe in you as you go beyond that, that's what makes you actually want to take that initiative and to do those things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like it. Go
So
ahead.
yeah, the recent thing that has happened is so exciting. So like there was on the 17th of January, on the Sunday,
Mhm.
there was an H plus meeting workshop, and there were breakout rooms afterwards, and so on. So there's sort of a debate between two people, and then breakout rooms afterwards. And they created a video from that. They could have taken any parts, any one of the breakout rooms, whatever. And, Taryn's remarks in the breakout room, so clearly, they're not, and they're not like at the very end or something. They're sort of 2/3 through the video, so I mean, they could have easily left her out, but now she's a part of the main, video record of what happened. And they had initially felt so threatened that like we were trying to compete with their organization and so on. And once they met Taryn, it's like resistance was futile, you know. They had no idea she was really like the person she is. I can't imagine her being evil and bad and so on. She just doesn't seem to have those characteristics, you know. So they decided to kind of make her a part of their effort, at least in that video. And similarly, David Wood, I think he was a little bit hesitant about joining our teaching here, but it turned out very well for him. He's working on a new book. He's already written 500 pages of it. And after meeting Taryn and taking part in this experience with us, he's changing entirely what the purpose of that book is. And you know, sort of rethinking the whole thing. so exciting to. I mean, he really is kind of, you know, the best author out there at the moment, and in this area of sort of human flourishing, transhumanism. And you might say, well, the likelihood is you won't be able to alter anything. You know, it's like it's just a waste of his time. And, you know, you've tricked him into taking part in these completely worthless teaching sessions. But he learned all sorts of stuff. And one of the other components is that, you know, I have 23 years of history of sort of humanitarian medical work in Nepal, and they're starting a new university there, and they've asked me to help with that. So colleagues having to do with that, we're also part of one of our teaching sessions that was at 7:30. I think David Wood also found that very stimulating and gave him all sorts of new ideas of, you know, the broad impact that our work could have, not only in first world countries, but also in limited resource settings. So all I can say is it is very gratifying to see this idea of young people's creativity really working. And there's every evidence now that it is really working and that it's satisfying for the young people. You two didn't have to be forced to be here. It's not like every moment of interaction with me has been like painful and icky, and you really hate to talk about it. You actually sound like you've actually enjoyed it, you know. So anyway.
I did want to say one thing, and this is going back to what Taryn had discussed. I think as this journey goes along, the idea of this almost this encouragement from, you know, your older peers that kind of Taryn was discussing, I think unless you have a really dedicated mentor, I think it's something that can be really overlooked as young people try and take on new projects. And I think, like, what I'd say to that is, I think people see young people like us coming out of university, or, you know, just at the tail end of university. And I think that a lot of people assume that at that point, you know, you're extremely mature, you're extremely self functioning, and you can handle all these things on your own. And to an extent, that's completely true. But also, you still are that really naive person coming out of university. 4 years under your belt in the grand scheme of things doesn't really mean a lot. And coming out into the real world, it's very important, I think, to have your older mentors just show any level of enthusiasm for you, of belief in you. And I think, like I said, unless it's a dedicated mentor who is used to doing these kind of things, I think your older peers around you can sometimes lose sight of that, of how important it is to just give your belief to someone who is younger than you, who is starting out, who who does have different ideas to yourself. Um, I think people discount the catalyst really that just a positive words of affirmation can give someone, especially when they're moving into something completely new.
Mhm.
So I think what Taryn said, you know, is so important. And I think it's unfortunately something that's often overlooked in the grand scheme of generating new ideas.
Yeah. Well, my assumption is always that, when I meet a new young person, that they're a potential superhero who can accomplish much more than I ever have in my life. But I'm meeting them in their sort of juvenilia
Mhm.
phase before they become famous, right? And nobody knows what an absolutely remarkable person they are. And so, eventually because they're so uber famous, they'll be surrounded by this impenetrable security and nobody will be able to actually talk to them and stuff. So it's just such a privilege to be able to talk with them now. So my belief about that with a new young person that I meet, it's sometimes erroneous. Some of those people are probably, fairly generic. They're not really going to, distinguish themselves. But the fact that I thought that they could doesn't hurt anybody, right?
Yeah.
That's a
Hmm.
victimless crime. If I take some ordinary person and give them the impression that they could do fantastic things for the world, maybe that will encourage them to do that. But if it doesn't work, that's
Yeah.
fine. Nobody's harmed by that.
Hmm.
So yeah. And you can think about wasting time all different ways, and I'm really philosophical about it. Lakini Bat, who's in her first year of medical school at the University of Toronto, where they're doing actual shadowing now. We're not doing shadowing here. It's not it felt to be safe because of COVID, but at the University of Toronto, they are doing it. So she's one of the few students that I met who always seemed to be on a clock and had allocated a certain amount of time for this and then had another place to be, another place to be. Whereas like particularly if you think back in 2014, 2015, a lot of students were just hanging out with us, right? They didn't have any next destination. Absolutely not, right? But it it's also I don't know which is right. I've known a number of people who really accomplished a lot, who had that constant clock in their mind, only got 30 minutes to spend with this person, then I have to be there and there. And there's always a next destination, always a place to go, right? So either way is fine, but I think it is encouraging to think that young people can be that dedicated toward what they've decided to do with their life, even early on, where there is that kind of feeling. I can't just sit around all day. I have important things to do. So yeah, that's
Yeah.
another thing that I like. But so let's go back to talking about the situation that we're in.
Mhm.
So the proposal for the moment would be that the Robert Heptinstall Symposium will be in Baltimore and will probably be of limited size and have a lot of young people involved. They could be young people from Edmonton. They could be people with kidney pathology or kidney medicine background, or possibly computing science, because that's also something that is relevant to kidney pathology these days. Well, that that idea for that kind of meeting is not within the framework of what the Renal Pathology Society does. They do meetings associated with larger meetings because that works better financially. And they have it as a satellite meeting, either in the same city where the larger meeting is or somewhere close and so on. So at the moment, we're kind of on our own, which isn't bad because I mean, that gives us enormous freedom. So the current plan is very simple, that we are planning on a hybrid face-to-face meeting for the 30th anniversary Banff Transplant Pathology meeting, October 4th to the 7th, 2021. For many people, it may be their first face-to-face medical meeting in quite a while. And then depending upon how that goes, we'll plan the Robert Heptinstall Symposium after that, taking the lessons from how that went, whether there really was substantial face-to-face presence or whether everybody ended up being virtual, no one came to the venue, you know, what happens and how it felt to people, how it could have been improved, because there's absolutely no hurry. What the Robert Heptinstall family has said is they want to celebrate his life after the pandemic's over. So if you think about the COVID variants now that are more infectious and more dangerous to young people and so on, it's going to be a while before you can really say that the pandemic's over. So we have time, you know, we don't have to rush into this. But I think to have it really obvious that the meeting is not just about kidney pathology and the cutting edge of kidney pathology, but these two other themes may seem really strange and weird to a lot of people, which is young people's creativity and the power behind meetings of limited size, less than 150, less than Dunbar's number. Yeah, that will lessen the people who want to come, but maybe increase the quality, right? And yeah, so anyway, any thoughts about those plans?
I think it definitely will make a very unique audience, right? Like if you're limiting it to a certain size and you want, you know, young people, like already you're shifting that demographic. You're making space for new types of conversations, you know?
Sure.
I think it's really exciting, and I'm excited to see, you know, how people of all ages who are able to attend, how they're able to, you know, take that kind of creative approach. And like, I think it's, you know, you'll talk about the topics du jour, of course, but I think
Sure.
it's also maybe an exercise in showing people, like showing instead of just telling people what to do, right? Showing them how you can involve young people, showing them that these things are possible and this kind of creativity is possible.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's exactly what I hope, and I think the politics behind it, the fact that if you combine people interested in, you know, Amanda Gorman, people interested in Robert Heptinstall, people interested in Bob Schreier, you know, and people interested in the 30th anniversary of Banff transplant pathology meetings, you have a kind of dedicated core then of people who are really excited about this. And you can make it the vehicle to teach the world out there about things that they just had no idea these concepts were worth thinking about at all, you know? And it's a very common prejudice to feel that you should hang out with people your own age. I don't think it's really written down anywhere, but it almost doesn't need to be, right? It's like, oh yeah, well, that's obvious. It's strange and weird to hang out with people who are very different age from you. But we're kind of proving day after day that works just fine. The fact that I'm 50 years or more older than most of the people that I interact with seems to be a positive rather than a negative thing. It brings resources and ideas in both directions. And yeah, so that's totally working. Yeah. Okay. So, any other things you would like to talk about? I think we've covered most of the aspects of this, and I yeah. So, any other thoughts or?
I think overall, I'm with Taryn. I'm just excited to see how this meeting's going to come together. I think the demographics you have laid out, it can only lead to interesting conversation as far as I'm concerned. So,
right, yeah. Okay, well, we'll keep these conversations flowing. I'll let you know about the new plan for the graphics. I have to figure out
yes,
how to kind of pitch that, but I have a feeling that it's really likely to happen, and I think it'll be wonderfully rewarding for you to see our hopes and dreams come to fruition finally, eh? So yeah.
absolutely. I'll be looking forward to it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you both very much.
Great.
And
Thank you, Dr. Solez.
we'll be in touch.
Yeah. Pleasure meeting you, Taryn.
It was nice to meet you too.
Bye bye.
Bye.